Friday, the 3rd of July, 1863. For 2 days, the Army of Northern Virginia and the Army of the Potomac have battled over the land south of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Federal and rebel hospitals are full, civilians giving their homes over to help with the thousands of men. Between Cemetery Ridge and Seminary Ridge, hundreds of dead and dying lay in the hot Pennsylvania sun, as the two armies sit idle, waiting for the next moves. Robert E. Lee, commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, directed an early assault on the Union flanks. Again, but confusion took place. A renewed assault on the Union right at Culp's Hill occurs, but none at the Union left ever do. But Lee is still not done for this, never before leaving the enemy victorious. He plans to concentrate his artillery on Seminary Ridge, facing off with West Cemetery Ridge, then amass a large artillery barrage, a feu d'enfer, targeting the Union center. Then General James Longstreet's corps will cross 2 miles between the positions and split the Union right down the center. It's a bold move, and while this attack is taking place, Jeb Stuart and his cavalry will attack Union supply lines near the Baltimore Pike, causing overall confusion and routing the entire Federal Army. Lee calls on Longstreet, who he refers to as his war horse, and consults him with the plan. Longstreet is skeptical, especially due to his first 2 divisions being so damaged from the assaults the day before. Lee agrees on the state of Longstreet's corps. He makes the decision to replace the 2 divisions. Pickett will still lead the assault, but in place of McLaws and Hood's divisions, he will give Heath's division, now under the command of James Pettigrew, and Pender's division, now commanded by General Isaac Tremble, from A.P. Hill's corps, to commit the attack. Longstreet is still very concerned and doubts the success of the attack. However, he is a loyal lieutenant and agrees to the command, the attack, for General Lee. The morning of the 3rd is now spent moving infantry up and down Seminary Ridge and placing artillery, which from afar could give off the idea that the army was preparing to leave. In command of the artillery was Colonel Porter Alexander, who was directing placement and observing the Union position. His job is to clear the Federal artillery and also as much infantry as possible, then cover the infantry assault the best they can. Meanwhile, Longstreet met with Pickett, Pettigrew, and Tremble to discuss the attack. It would be a tight parade order attack. Pickett's division on the left, with 2 brigades leading and 1 in reserve. To Pickett's left, Pettigrew will lead, supported by Tremble. Their objective is a group of trees. Now, there is a debate between historians whether it was the copse of trees, where a monument this day rests, or the Ziegler Grove, which some believe would have been more visible to the Confederates. But regardless, the Confederates will converge on that point, and hopefully at that point enough artillery and infantry were cleared off the ridge so the Confederates will split the Union Army. Across the field, though, Meade has only reinforced his position, including moving the 6th Corps back to the center to serve as his reserve. And commanding the Union center was General Winfield Scott Hancock and his 2nd Federal Corps. The Federal Army is content and feels safe in their positions. On Seminary Ridge, over 2 miles, Porter Alexander has deployed Confederate artillery, preparing for the attack. In the woods behind him, the 3 divisions await the attack. At 1 o'clock p.m., over 150 Confederate artillery opened fire onto the Union center. Federal artillery immediately began to return fire. Meade, who is inspecting East Cemetery Hill, directs batteries to turn to support the Union center, and ordered artillery on the Union left to do the same. For an hour, this duel will continue, to the point that people as far as Philadelphia could hear the bombardment occurring, inciting fear in the city. Hundreds of guns blasting at one another. This will be the largest artillery bombardment on the North American continent. It will continue for an hour. Alexander did not expect to continue firing for so long. His instructions were to clear the ridge, then cover the infantry assault. But the bombardment was dragging. He sent a dispatch to Longstreet, who was sitting on horseback watching the bombardment with George Pickett. "If you are coming at all, come at once, or I cannot give you the proper support. But the enemy's fire has not slackened at all. At least 18 guns are still firing from the cemetery itself." Pickett approached his commander. "General, shall I advance?" Longstreet stared into the abyss a moment. Pickett once again requested, "Shall I commence the advance?" Longstreet could not say words and simply nodded. Pickett rode off as adjutants went to inform Pettigrew and Tremble to begin the advance. Longstreet was left alone, contemplating what was about to occur. Drums began to beat loud as the gray line began to stage itself out of the woods. The Federal artillery had gone silent, and now the entire infantry force believed Lee, once again, was going to lead them to victory. Pickett screamed to his Virginians, "Charge the enemy, and for Old Virginia." Again the drums beat, and the Confederate line began to advance in parade style toward Cemetery Ridge. Unfortunately for the Confederates, Alexander had knocked out the Union artillery or chased off the Federal troops. The reason the artillery had stopped was the Federals were in fact resupplying their ammunition carriage, and the reason that they did not see infantry was because the Second Corps men were hiding under the cover of a stone property wall that was keeping them hidden. In fact, the Confederates had been overshooting, hitting Meade's headquarters some 530 yards from the Confederates' objective. But the Southerners began what they believed to be their triumphant march into immortality and glory. The last 2 years, the dead friends and loved ones, all came to this point. However, Winfield Scott Hancock was prepared to crush that hope. As the Confederates approached the first fences in their path, Federal artillery from Cemetery Hill, Cemetery Ridge, and Little Round Top began to rip into the Confederate lines. Giant holes ripping the lines apart, while officers dressed the ranks and keeping the march going. Lee and Longstreet could see in the open as their men were being demolished. As the Southerners reached the Emmitsburg Road, they could hear "Rise Up" as a line of blue rose from behind the stone wall and began to indiscriminately fire into the organizing troops. General Alexander Webb, in command of the Philadelphia Brigade, and more specifically the center of the Union line, knew this was not only the most important moment, but felt right it was his Pennsylvania Brigade about to hold back the Confederate attack. General Hancock himself would be personally commanding the line as Confederates got within yards of the center, and more specifically, the Union angle. Kemper and Garnett were directed to target a group of trees and were trying to puncture into the wall of blue. But during the maneuver, Kemper will be wounded and Garnett killed. Tremble and Pettigrew will also be wounded as the advance continued and their divisions were being cut apart from artillery and infantry fire. As the three divisions were shrinking, Hancock was personally directing Vermont troops when he will also be wounded, refusing to be removed from the field until the action was decided. Confederate troops were now wavering, especially in Pickett's division. The first two brigades had now lost their commanders. But finally, Lewis Armistead arrived with his brigade to the situation. Rallying the Virginians, placing his hat on his sword, rallied the men and renewed the assault. Webb's division then became overrun, withdrawing from the wall, retreating behind the rest of Hay's division, who was awaiting the Confederates. Armistead's and the Virginians got over the wall, believing that they were so close to victory, flooding into the Union position. However, the hope would disappear in the cloud of smoke from the volley of Union troops into them. Federal troops all began to charge in, engaging in hand-to-hand combat. In the chaos, General Armistead himself will be shot and wounded. Soon the attack would end in a Union victory, as terrified Confederates retreated, some marching backwards, horrified of the idea of being shot in the back. Lee was stunned, watching the defeat, as the Union troops of the Second Corps began to chant over and over again, Fredericksburg, mocking Lee for repeating Burnside's mistake at Fredericksburg. In the Union rear, Stuart's attack was foiled when Federal Cavalry Corps stopped the attack. The battle was done, and the Union Army was victorious. Lee rode quickly to his men. He began to blame himself, begging for his soldiers for their forgiveness. His soldiers denied his guilt, begging to let them try again, to which he said no. Lee then approached General Pickett, who was sitting alone on the field. Lee said to Pickett, "General, you must look to your division." Pickett, with a lost look in his eye, uttered the infamous quote, "General Lee, I have no division." In less than an hour, Pickett had lost all 3 of his brigade commanders, and his division was destroyed. Longstreet and Lee met as night fell. The battle old man with his warhorse began to plan the withdrawal and what the next steps would be. On the Union side, Meade was jubilant with victory, but at the cost of Hancock and thousands of men. He himself was now responsible for pursuing Lee and also helping clear the field. The next day, Saturday, July 4th, 1863, as Lee began to withdraw out of Gettysburg, Vicksburg, Mississippi, finally fell to the army of Ulysses S. Grant. With 2 victories in the East and West, the Confederacy's lifespan was now on a timer, and the war was 2 years away from ending. Over 3 days, 51,112 casualties will be suffered between the 2 armies.